Te doy la bienvenida a una nueva entrevista de músicos en Canal. Hoy vamos a hablar de un instrumento que, aunque pasa desapercibido normalmente, tiene una importancia esencial en cualquier conjunto musical. ¿Imaginas cuál es? El bajo. Y para ello, hoy nos acompaña un bajista que ha trabajado con un montón de grandísimos artistas. Directamente desde Los Ángeles, hoy nos acompaña Max Gerl. ¿Le damos la bienvenida? ¡Empezamos! Hello, Max. Welcome. How are you?
I'm very well. How are you? Thank you for having me.
It's a pleasure. I'm so happy you're here. And I'm sure we're going to have a great conversation. But before we start, Max, I'm going to introduce you a little bit for people who are going to watch the video. You are an acoustic and electric bass player. And music has been in your DNA since you were born because both of your parents are musicians, violists, both of them. And you grew up going to your mother's concerts and spent much time with your father listening to classic rock and jazz fusion. As bass player, you have worked with many artists such as James Francis, Mayaka McRaven, Cameron Graves, Arturo Sandoval, and these are just a few of the many names you have worked with. Besides this, you play with your own quartet, and you have 2 albums, Tbilisi, and the last one was a Freddie.
Yes.
And about this, Max, I know Tbilisi is the capital city of Georgia, so I guess you choose that name because you like the city a lot. But about Wasafiri, as long as I know, it means travelers in Swahili. And
Yes.
etymologically, it's linked with the Arabic word safari. So did you choose this name for the album because you travel a lot from gig to gig, or where comes the name for the album?
So I actually didn't choose the name. The way that record happened was a record label that I work with from my hometown in Dallas, Texas. I was doing a record of my own for them that would just have been under my name. And the people that run the record, their names are Jeff Wade and Luke Sardello. They said that they had this idea that they wanted to do a 70s style fusion record, and before we even talked about the music and the influences, they already had the name and they had the concept, so that was in place beforehand. The reason that they chose the name, though, was there's a couple of different reasons, and they chose it for the idea of traveling, specifically because we were 50 years removed from what you could say is maybe the golden era of jazz. And they told me, we want this to sound like it was made between 72 to 76, very specific years. So they had their experience with that music. Originally they were like techno DJs, but they used to go to the record stores to find vinyl records that they could sample. And so then they found the Headhunters and Weather Report and stuff like that, and they went down the jazz rabbit hole. And so they're, I think, between 20 to 30 years older than I am. So then whenever I was growing up and then I found a Weather Report record and then I went down the rabbit hole, we had the same experience, that sort of mind-blowing moment of, whoa, this is incredible. There's this whole genre that I wasn't aware of. But from whenever the style was being created in the 70s to when they discovered it in the 90s to when I discovered it in the late 2000s, early 2010s, this music is sort of traveling through time. So that was the first part that they chose to go with the name. The second part was an ode to Herbie Hancock, who before he had the Headhunters, he had the Mwandishi Band, which, if I'm not mistaken, is Swahili for musician or something to that effect. I could be wrong on that, but so those were the reasons for choosing that name. But it does happen to be kind of ironic because I do travel from gig to gig. But
I know. It's very interesting what you said, because I was going to ask you, I heard you sometime talking about this album, and you said that you wanted to make an album inspired in music between 1972 and 1976. And one of the questions it was going to be like, what happened in those years, in concrete, in those years that are so important, and not the 77 or 71?
Well, there was so many of the important albums in that genre that we sort of consider as canonical examples of jazz fusion were made in those years. So Herbie Hancock and the Headhunters, which features the song Chameleon, that came out then. Mahavishnu, the Intermounting Flame Mahavishnu Orchestra came out then. Chick Corea's Return to Forever Light as a Feather came out then. So many of these classic albums were in those sets of years, which I didn't realize until I started looking into it. They gave me the date range, and I figured, okay, well, you know, I know the fusion records that I love, so maybe I'll go back through and see if they were made in those years, and almost all of them were. And so it was a fun project to put together, because it's not an album that I would have thought to make without them requesting that for the label. So what started as a project to be done sort of as a commission ended up becoming passion project is the wrong term, but I became very passionate about it the more that we worked on it.
It's a very interesting album. Okay, we're gonna talk about when you choose the bass. I know you choose the bass because your father put on a Led Zeppelin DVD, and you saw John Paul Jones playing the bass, and he was with a white suit, and you like that white suit. So I want to ask you, did you decide to play bass because of the instrument, the sound of the instrument, or because of the white suit?
Probably the white suit, if I'm being honest, because at the time, you know, bass is such an interesting instrument because it's so important to the direction and the quality of the music, but a lot of people they're not tuned into it. They don't hear it per se. So at the time, like, I knew what it was doing because I could see what John Paul Jones was playing, and I could kind of hear it, but the concept of what he was doing in the role that he's playing foundationally, I didn't realize the significance of that until years later. But that specific moment where I saw this video, that came because another good friend of mine, whenever I was in school, I think I was 10 maybe, he got a guitar for Christmas. And I said, oh, this is great. You know, I'll get a guitar too. And then we'll start a band. And he said, absolutely not. I'm the guitar player. You need to get a bass. So I said, okay, well, you know, what's a bass? You know, what is that? Because at the time, the only thing I really knew about what a bass was going to see my mom's concerts. And I knew that the giant things, those were basses. And that didn't seem like it made a ton of sense to go with an electric guitar, which, you know, I now realize is not true. But at the time I was 10, I didn't know anything. So once it seemed like the thing to do. And at the time I played piano for 7 years and I played saxophone a little bit, but none of them really stuck. I didn't have to play them. But I remember the day that I brought home the bass for the first time, like I had to have my hands on it all the time. Like if I was, you know, if I had friends over, if I had a sleepover with my friends when I was 11 or 12, I would just have the bass the whole time and they would complain. Like I remember my friends at the time, like, why are you, like, we're trying to watch a movie, why are you playing bass? Like, I can't, I have to. Sorry. But that's sort of how that happened. You know, it kind of, once it got in my hands, it just clicked, and it's, you know, hasn't left my hands since, and hopefully never will.
And how many times have you played with a white suit?
Never.
Never? I thought you were gonna say at least once.
I've done gigs where I've had to wear all white, but never a white suit. But the other thing too is that, I mean, that was the 70s, so the shoulder pads were like out to here. It was the whole thing. So one of these days I'll maybe do a gig like that. I have a gig on my birthday this year, and it's my band, so maybe I'll do it for that gig. I don't know. We'll see.
You should do it.
Yeah, I might do it actually.
All right. Well, Max, Patrick Suskind, in his book, The Double Bass, that I don't know if you read it, but the main character said, when the bass is excluded, the jazz band disintegrates like an explosion. Everything stops making sense for the rest of the musicians. Do you agree?
There are times where that is true. there are instances where I have seen that to be true. I like to think of the bass as a glue, like it's a glue sonically. And so in a lot of ways, you're a translator whenever you're playing good, not playing the bass, but playing bass as a concept. Mm-hmm. Then because you bear a lot of responsibility. So with the drums, they're responsible for the rhythmic integrity of the music. If you're playing with a quartet, so if say we're playing with a quartet where we have saxophone, drums, piano, and then bass, drums are responsible for rhythmic integrity. The piano player is responsible for harmonic integrity and support. And the bass is sort of responsible for making all of that together. So if you were to have, again, a saxophone quartet, then if you remove the drums, then you'll still have rhythm because you have the bass. Mm-hmm. If you remove the piano, you'll still have harmony because of the bass. But if you remove the bass, then you have rhythm and you have harmony, but there's not really that shared middle ground. The reason I say sometimes, though, is when you get really strong players, like a really strong piano player can give you the time. They can give you that rhythmic integrity. And a great drummer will know how to play to the extent that they can with the instrument. A great drummer will know how to play in a way that supports the harmony and melody of the song. But I think for the bass, I like to look at it as you're translating what's happening here for the soloist. So if a saxophone player is playing and then the piano player plays something kind of crazy harmonically, I like to think that because a piano player they can give you 10 notes at one time. That's a lot of harmonic information to decipher on the spur of the moment. So it's a lot easier with just one note from the bass. So I think sometimes that can sort of serve as a translator. Because if the piano player plays 10 notes at once, every note that I play is going to change what that harmony is. If I play a G, then those 10 notes mean something. If I move it up to an A flat, those 10 notes now mean something else. And that all influences how the soloist might be reacting to the harmony the piano player is playing. The same thing goes for the drums. If our drummer wants to put a polyrhythm or they want to insert an idea or a theme into the music, then sometimes what you do in response to that, whether or not that is playing a bass line that complements what they're doing, or whether you play something counter to that, so you're not combating it, but playing contrapuntally against that, that changes everything. And then what I like to do personally as a bass player, one of my teachers, incredible bass player, the great John Patitucci, his way of describing it is he calls it the pillow effect. You're trying to put a pillow underneath the band. So instead of thinking about a bass line that I can play to fit into the music, I like to think of a bass line I can put under everything that just puts a nice, gentle feeling under the whole band. And it's a lot easier to talk about than it is to do. But so I think whenever people talk about, you pull the bass out and the band, goes to hell, I think that can be true, but with strong musicians, anybody can be able to come and go as they please, and the music won't suffer.
Well, very interesting about the pillow, because I was going to ask you, when you are in a gig and you see the audience clapping after a solo of a trumpet or saxophone or wherever, have you ever thought like, well, yeah, you can clap to the soloist, but this works because I'm the bass and I'm the boss. It's like with no pillow, you can not sleep well. With no bass, there is not good music at all.
That's a good way of putting it. With no pillow, you are not going to sleep well. I like that. I'm going to remember that. So the way I feel about that is if the soloist plays the kind of solo that an audience reacts that strongly to, then I like to think about that as a group, we have achieved the aim. And so playing with Arturo, for example, and obviously one of the greatest musicians the world has ever seen. And he can go out on a stage by himself and play for an hour and play incredibly well. So our challenge with Arturo is not, we don't need to try and make him sound better, because he's going to be incredible no matter what. But it's little things like, how can we complement what he does? How can we create tension and release? How can we provide more energy? The little things that, if he let's say he's just playing and he's blowing, and then he finds an idea that he repeats, just like a few notes or something, and he repeats, that's an opportunity to build tension. So maybe when he's doing that, I'll just stick on one note and create harmonic tension underneath. The drums latch on and they start building as well. So when we get to maybe the end of 8 or 16 bars, I like to think of tension and release in terms of bars of 4, because it's how people, at least in my experience, how audiences tend to process music well. We get to the end of 16 bars of building tension, and then we go back into a groove that they're used to hearing. Then all of a sudden that release is powerful. And it's not that it's necessarily making the soloist sound better, but it's providing somewhat of a backdrop. It's almost like if you have a painting where you have a person in the painting at the front, but then what we're trying to provide is what's happening behind them. Maybe they're standing in a park, maybe there's a dog, maybe there's a T-Rex, maybe there's a car explosion, who knows? But we're trying to provide what that looks like. So I always want the audience's perception of what's happening on stage to be looking at a multi-dimensional painting with many things happening, but it serves the overarching purpose of what you see in between the lines or what you hear from start to finish.
All right. And because of the rhythmic and harmonic functions and all the importance that has the bass, do you think this is an instrument that is more vocational than other instruments? Because it's an instrument that people, you said it minutes ago, people usually don't hear the bass, but the bass is so important to be there. So it's maybe a little bit more vocational or not?
I don't know. That's a good question. I think I think that it does what it's supposed to do, which is not be flashy for the most part. And I've spent a good part of my time practicing and as a bass player developing technique, because I enjoy performing as a soloist as well. But I think that this is actually a problem that a lot of bass players get into, is we tend to play with a little bit of a chip on our shoulder. We like to play like, okay, yeah, y'all are the soloists, but we can play too. And people start getting into trouble with that because they're so eager to prove that they're not just the bass player, that they forget that, we have a job to do. So in some ways, yes. And I think that, I think it has to be treated that way. Like, you have I'll put it this way, Nicholas Payton, the trumpet player, he had an interview one time where somebody asked him, they said, what do you think about bass, like the role of the bass in the band? And this is an exaggeration, but he said, next to parenthood, it's the hardest job on the planet. Treat it accordingly. And it's a joke, but it's, with one note, you can either elevate or destroy a gig with one note. Correctly or incorrectly, correctly or incorrectly. So I think in some ways, yes, it's not to be taken lightly. It's you carry a lot of responsibility as the bass player, but I think sometimes you have to let go of that and just do your best to have fun. If you're having fun, everybody else will have fun. Which I like to dance when I play, even if we're playing jazz. Like if we're playing free jazz, crazy stuff, if I can't make myself dance, how am I going to make anybody else dance? And your job is kind of, you know, make people move. If people aren't moving, you're not doing it right. That's sort of my contention.
Ah, that's a good point. That's a good point. Max, I want to ask you about two things I wonder about. One of them is electric bass has 2 strings, but you play a 6-string bass.
Yes, I do.
Different between playing one or another? It's because you have more range, or you have extra notes, or what's the difference?
So extra range is the sort of like the surface level. This is what you get with the 6-string. So I'll show you. So with my instrument, with the 6-string, the 4 in the middle here, this is a normal 4-string instrument. So I have 1 string that's lower and 1 string that's higher. But if you do the actual math on it, I only have 5 extra notes on the low end. So it's not that many, but the sound from this to this, it gives you a lot of options. And there are certain kinds of music where you need that low end. Now, on the high side of it, a usual bass would end here. And that's already if you had an extended range 4-string. But so beyond that, I have, which is another 5 notes. So the range isn't extended by that much as it is that it gives you options. So we'll say, for instance, so if I'm playing with the 6-string, it just gives me options where I would like to play it. So if I play here, that gives me a little bit of a different sound than if I play the same note here. Same note, same range, but here it's a little tighter and it feels more compressed is the wrong word, but it's more streamlined. Here, the note's a little bigger, it's wider, it's almost bloated. So if I'm playing and we're like really going in and I'm trying to not play too many notes, I just want to play like big open things, pillow, then I'll probably do it down here because the sound just feels bigger. But if I need to play more actively, I would play closer to here just because it'll give me a little bit more of a tightness. Mm-hmm. So that's my big thing with the 6-string in terms of playing the role of bass. It just gives you options sonically. And then for improvising, of course, I like to have the high notes because, you know, again, people don't really hear bass. So it's frustrating to feel like you have something to say, but nobody can hear it. The notes are too low.
It's a little frustrating.
And at this point, there are so many incredible bass soloists around now. It's just mind blowing how many good players there are. And especially living in Los Angeles, you know, we're fortunate because on any given night you can go out and hear Hadrian Farad, who is a sorcerer with the instrument. And then there's Robert Bubby Lewis, who's also mind blowing. And there's just so many great players. It's staggering and humbling. But yeah, I could go on about that for a while, actually.
And Max, how are your fingerprints doing? If you are caught by the police, they can read your fingerprints, or you don't have already fingerprints?
You know, I have parts of my fingers where there are definitely no fingerprints. It's little pieces. Ironically enough, I find that it's on my left hand more than my right, just from the acoustic bass, because it's holding the strings down is such a chore. And especially for sliding, because the strings are so thick, it's almost you're playing a tree with telephone wires for strings. So keeping those pressed down, it's like the tips of my left hand are, you know, if you were to put like a match on them, I wouldn't feel it.
Wait. Okay, well, I'm sure your fingerprints are okay to pass the first music challenge. So you feel like playing? Let's go. First music challenge. We need the track number 1 that I sent you, and it's inspired by fusion music that I know you like. Mm-hmm. And in the track there are instruments, but there is no bass. That's yeah. So let's see what you do. Hear it, or as we say in Spanish, dale caña. Por un problema técnico no hemos podido hacer los retos musicales. Aún así, Max ha tenido la amabilidad de grabar uno de los desafíos, nos lo ha enviado y aquí lo tienes. Disfrútalo. I want to talk with you about fusion. We could say fusion music adds rock or funk elements to jazz. And from the 70s, some great musicians, jazz musicians, started to play this kind of music, like Miles Davis and Chick Corea and Joe McLaughlin, or groups like Weather Report. But at the same time, some rock musicians started to play fusion and get very close to jazz. So fusion was like bidirectional. So the question is, do you think the concept of purity in music is a myth?
I feel like there's a couple of different ways to answer that. Everything came from somewhere. So kind of, but also kind of not. So I think of, they talk a lot about jazz purists, for example, or people who are of the opinion that jazz doesn't exist anymore, that jazz died when Charlie Parker died. And I understand where they make that argument from, but I also think that jazz, as it was known with Charlie Parker, that came from somewhere too. It didn't just spring up from the ground. There were influences that brought it to where it was. So I think that exists for everything. Everything came from somewhere. So unless somebody I think the closest thing that we get to musical purity, or I feel kind of weird using those words specifically. I'll say the most natural music, I think, would just be hand percussion and singing, because that's just there are no instruments, there's nothing, there's just what can I make come from my body. So I think that in terms of musical purity, I think that's probably all there is just what you can sing and what you can do with your hands. I don't know if that answers the question per se, but I do think that saying that something is just by itself independent of everything else, I don't think that that's necessarily accurate.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, well, maybe if we think about the first jazz music in New Orleans, it was already fusion music because it has like African rhythms and Latin tinges and European melodies, and it was already a fusion.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And that's they talk about New York is the mecca of jazz, which these days it is, but that melting pot that was New Orleans in the early 20th century, that's absolutely where most of this music came from. And then you think about what we now know as Latin jazz, which is really Dizzy Gillespie and Chano Pozo. combining that sort of thing. And so this actually was just told to me recently, which makes complete sense. For whatever reason, it makes so much sense. I can't believe I didn't think about it before. But we talk about Night in Tunisia, the jazz standard, and it's funny to think about because the A sections of the song, they're Latin. so there's this Latin figure and more Latin harmony, but then the B section is bebop. And so I had somebody tell me recently, who's somewhat of a historian on the music, they said, yeah, John Opozo wrote the A section and Dizzy wrote the B section. Like, of course they did. That makes complete sense. The A section is Latin and the B section is swing, and it's so simple when it's put that way. But for whatever reason, it doesn't seem super intuitive. But yeah, I think all these different musical influences create what we know now. And so much of what's described as modern jazz now doesn't necessarily have a swing beat to it. A lot of it is more straight eights that does come more from the Latin American diaspora. So it's interesting to think about, without that melting pot, then music today as we know it is non-existent.
Mm-hmm. All right. Well, I know you like rock, so I want to ask you something about rock. I don't understand why so many rock musicians broke and destroyed their instruments after the gigs. Do you know the reason why they did that? Above all, guitarists, I don't know why.
Yeah, that I would not be able to tell you on that one. I don't think. I've never had the urge to break any of my gear. But
you never feel like destroying your bass, right?
I felt that way before during practice sessions, but not at the gig. No.
Can you imagine Arturo Sandoval breaking his trumpet, or after a gig, Arturo breaking your bass and you breaking Will's guitar and Will's breaking the drums and everything like a mess? It would be like very interesting.
I'll tell you what, though, I would pay a lot of money to see that show. I would pay to see that show.
I'm sure. Max, I'm going to confess something. I think there is a contrast between the music you play with your band and your quartet and the music you play with Arturo Sandoval. And I want to ask you, has it been difficult for you to adapt to the rhythms and style that you play with Arturo, or not?
Yes and no. And I'll start with why it hasn't been difficult. One of my first bass teachers was from Cuba, and my first lesson with him was to play a typical bass pattern, but then he gave me a foot pedal attached to a wood block. So he taught me the clave. Said, this is the clave and this is the bass pattern. Now do them both at the same time. Play the bass and then with your foot play the clave, which is very difficult at first. But so it's really good for your rhythmic independence. And that was my first lesson with him. So I spent a lot of years playing in a salsa orchestra when I was growing up in Dallas as well. But we had charts and I had bass parts that were already written. So I didn't really have to come up with them on my own. And that was the big thing I realized once I got with Arturo, was realizing I have a very surface level understanding of the music that he grew up with and where he's coming from. So that's where it's been difficult, is internalizing it enough to where I can improvise it and not just be doing the same thing over and over and over and over. Like, this is my one Cuban bass line and I will do it all the time. Trying to get away from that and have a little bit more freedom within the concept. And that's something I'm always thinking about and always working on. And I think to some extent, like, I do a decent job of faking it, is what I would say.
All right. And I'm going to ask you something that I think is very difficult to answer, but I'm going to ask you anyway. Do you have more fun when you play with Arturo or when you play by your own with your band and whatever you feel like playing? I mean, I know you enjoy, and I'm sure you like both, but if you could choose one, like with in this moment, I'm having so much fun that is wow. Which one would you choose?
Oh, that's challenging. I think I have to have both. If I was only doing my own music, then I would probably be a little upset to not be playing bass for other people. And if I was only playing bass for other people, I would feel that I'm leaving my own musical soul on the bench per se. Uh, I really need both, and I think that's part of what honestly helps me with Arturo is because I love so many different kinds of music and so many different ways of playing. But if I was only doing one all the time, I would go crazy. Like
Yes.
I love playing straight ahead jazz. I couldn't do that only all the time. I love playing fusion. I love playing Cuban music. I love playing orchestral music. But if I was only doing one all the time, I would lose it.
All right, I understand. Yeah, that's a good
And
answer.
and they inform each other. Like what I do with my music, that that changes how I play with Arturo, and how I play with Arturo changes how I play within my own music. I like to think of my musicianship as something that's constantly growing and developing and being influenced by all of my experiences. So even though it's been now almost a year with Arturo, and I now know his music really well, I know how he plays, I know that gig really well, but I'm still learning every time we play together. There's no gig that we do where I don't learn something from him, or about how to play the instrument better, or how to play the role of bass better. And the same thing goes as a leader. And the more I lead, the more I learn how to follow. Because now, when I think about the things like, okay, so I hired so and so to play, we'll say piano, for instance. So they didn't do this thing that I wanted. They did do this thing that I didn't want. They showed up late. They didn't learn the music, or they did learn the music. I now know a lot more about what it means to be a good sideman, because I've had to hire sidemen, and I realize what, for instance, I know what's really annoying to deal with as a leader, so I don't ever want to put Arturo in that situation.
Oh,
And I also know what I really love, and but it makes you patient with people. That is one thing I have learned from doing my own music is, if you know who somebody is, you can't be mad at them for not doing something that you know they don't do. And that might be how they behave as a professional, how they play their instrument, things like that. Like if I want to do a gig where we're going to play acoustic jazz piano trio, and I call a person who they only play synthesizer, then I can't be upset if we get to the gig and on piano it's not what I wanted. Or if I know somebody tends to be late, I can't expect them to be on time unless I tell, if I need them at 12, then I got to tell them I need you at 10. So when they get there 2 hours late, they're on time. But so it's things like that, just those hoops that you jump through as a leader, that I now know what it means to be a good side person. Like what would I appreciate as a leader? That's what I want to give to Arturo and to anybody else that I work for as a bassist for hire.
all right. As music is a way of communication, I want to ask you something about music, because it's an universal language, music. And I want to ask you, when you are on the stage, do you, as a bass player, do you communicate more with the rest of the musicians, with the audience, or both?
That depends. I think a lot of times I try to play as if there is no audience. And I say that in the sense that it's easy to, especially, with big audiences, it's easy to go out there and you see all the people and like, whoa, there's a lot of people. And you maybe get a little nervous. And I don't want to play that way. I want to play for the music, but you can't take that to the extreme and play as if you can't truly play as if there's no audience, because people paid money to come see a show. Like we're entertainers, we're there to make music, but we're also there to put on a show. Like people paid money, to forget about their, you know, they don't want to think about their job. They don't want to think about how annoying their boss is. They don't want to think about how rent's due in a week and they don't have any money. They came to have a good time and see a show that makes them feel something. And I feel we have to remember that at all times. And with remembering all that, the way that I do best is if I play in a way to serve the music as opposed to necessarily serving the crowd. But sometimes that changes. There are some shows that musically it doesn't require as much. So you can do more to serve, you know, the visual appeal of the show. You dance more, move around more, things like that. But, you know, I think with Arturo, there's a lot of both because we're playing hardcore jazz, but we're also playing Cuban dance music. People go to those shows because they know they're going to see both. And you have to give them both. Like when we're playing timba music and you're not dancing, you're doing it wrong. And you know, if I can't make myself dance, how am I going to make anybody else dance? So it's little things like that. But so I think a lot of that depends on the gig. But at all times, you can't forget that you are there to entertain an audience, and that is very important. But you can't be so caught up in entertaining the audience that you don't take care of the music. It's tricky territory that is something I'm always looking to get better at. That, you know, I'd imagine the more experience you get, the better you get at satisfying both requirements. But it can be a challenge. It can be a real challenge, if especially on big stages where maybe your sound isn't as good, so you can't hear what your bandmates are doing as well. And then, you know, you get in a bad mood, and then all of a sudden your body language stinks. But you can't do that. You know, like they don't care that the sound is bad. They don't care that you can't hear what's happening on stage. They paid money to see a show and forget about their boss, who's not a nice person, who, you know, to forget about maybe they don't have as much money as they need for their bills. They came to see a show and have a good time. And you have to put your stuff away and give them a show.
All right, this is very interesting because I was going to ask you about what do you feel when you play? And I think you answered in some way already. Do you play when you are on the stage? You think, well, maybe it depends of the day or the moment, but you think more like I enjoy music, or you are thinking more like I'm working?
I do my best to never feel like I'm just working. it's
I
it's
hope.
easier said than done. But so one thing that a lot of musicians in LA do is for extra money, we play weddings. You know, we'll play in wedding bands. And a lot of musicians don't like to do it because you're learning, you know, top 40 songs, things that aren't necessarily musically satisfying.
Mm-hmm.
And then the gigs are long. You're going to be playing for 5 hours. And I understand the complaint, but I also think I like to try and find things to enjoy on every gig. Even if I'm playing with musicians who might not be the best players, the music isn't super fun, the venue doesn't sound good, there's something to find in every gig that you can enjoy. So for me, like weddings, for instance, a lot of musicians don't like to do them, but I like to think there are two people at this wedding who just got married, and this is theoretically the best day of their lives. Let's give them a great show.
Yeah.
You know, it might not be the most fun musically, but these people hired me to have a good time. And as the bass player, it's my job to make people dance. So I'll be damned if I'm going to let these people have a wedding and not dance their butts off. so that's sort of my thing is I want to make sure that people are having I want to have fun on stage, but I want to convey that joy to the audience. And sometimes that means that if we're playing a song that's rooted in sadness, if we're playing something that's rooted in heartbreak, then I want that to be conveyed as well. And I think that you get there by just trying to convey the joy that it means to be able to play music.
All right. And how about emotions and feelings? Do you think with bass is more difficult to express or create emotions or some emotions than with other instruments like piano or guitar or wherever, any other instruments? Is more difficult? I think it is, but I don't know.
It can be because of the register. You know, the notes are so low that it can be difficult. But I am a firm believer that only a poor craftsman blames his tools. So I like to think that the emotions and the music is here, and this is it's an instrument. You know, this is the same thing as a hammer or a saw or a chisel that a carpenter would use to build you know, this is my paintbrush. A great painter would use their paintbrush to make a great painting that when people see it, they're moved and they feel things. They conveyed the emotion with the paintbrush. This is my paintbrush. It just happens to be something that is perceived sonically. So I would like to think that if you gave me enough time, I would be able to express my feelings on any instrument as long as I had time to figure out how.
All right. Max, if it were possible to bring to life to any dead musician, which one would you like to play with? You can just choose one.
John Coltrane.
Whoa, I thought you were going to say, I don't know.
You know, that one is especially to play with John Coltrane. John is my favorite musician ever, and that's I I don't think it. I don't really have any regrets in my life to this point, or I would say general sadness is like I try not to think about things like, oh, I was so sad I wasn't alive to see this or that. But that is one thing. It does hurt my heart that I'll never be able to experience the John Coltrane Quartet in person. That's if I could bring anybody back and play with them, Coltrane, no question.
Okay, okay. And tell me one musician you are not playing with yet and is alive and you would like to play with. Just one. I'm sure you have many names in your mind, but
yeah, I've got a few. I would love to play with Herbie Hancock. Herbie is somebody that's well. Can I do two, and can I also do another one for the recently deceased? So another person who just passed away. My dream for my whole life was to play with Chick Corea. That was my dream of dreams, and so when he passed away, that was heartbreaking for a lot of reasons. But Chick was the dream, and I think Herbie is somebody that he still plays all the time. I don't know where he gets the energy from. He's in his 80s and he's still, if you go see his band, he's still just so high energy, just playing so good. It's really incredible. And I think with Herbie, there's so much knowledge there. He's lived so much life and played so much music. And that's something that I get a lot of joy from. And I get a lot of joy with Arturo with this. Somebody who has experienced what he's experienced, just the stories he can tell. It's incredible. And the same thing with my mentor, who is Stanley Clark. I was at his house a few days ago and he's telling stories, and I was hanging out with Charles Mingus and this happened, or I remember hanging with Miles and Chick Corea at the Village Vanguard and this happened. Those kinds of stories, the knowledge you can receive from the elders in this music, that's something that I cherish those times and those opportunities. So Herbie would be the person who's alive now.
Okay, good names. You say good names. Well, Max, we are almost at the end of the interview. Ooh, but before we go, I have another challenge for you. This is a special challenge because it's a quiz. It's a quiz.
Okay, all right.
6 questions. Let's see how you do it.
All right.
I have my pen ready to write down.
All right, let's see how we do.
And your failed answers. So let's see.
All right.
Ready?
All right, let's do it.
The first one, I warn you with this one, Max. Will Brown and Mark Walker and Max Hamer failed this one. So be careful.
Okay, all right, okay.
All right. I saw you last summer here in Spain, in Valladolid, and you played a little bit of Hot House. The question is, who was the composer of Hot House? Take your time.
I feel like I want to say what I think is the obvious answer, but because they all got it wrong, it can't be that.
I can't tell you anything yet.
Okay. Ooh, okay. It was Dizzy, right?
Oh no!
Yeah, that's why. Yeah, I knew it was going to be wrong, but it seems so. So it was Charlie Parker then, or it was neither?
No, Ted Dameron.
Yeah. Okay. All right.
It's
Fair
okay.
enough.
Will Bram and Mark Walker said Dizzy Gillespie. Max said Victor something. So it's Ted Dameron.
Okay. All right. Well, so they all got it wrong. I don't feel too bad then. But that is a good one. That's a good question though.
I'm gonna write down one full answer. Let's see. The second one. Okay, a question about bebop. In his album called Jaco Pastorius, Jaco included a very known song called Donna Lee. And in this song, there is only a bass with a little bit of percussion. The question, who was the composer of Donna Lee?
Miles Davis.
No.
Charlie Parker did credit Miles Davis with the composition on that.
Charlie Parker, it was. Miles Davis, it wasn't.
I'm pretty sure he said Miles wrote it.
Pues resulta que Max tenía razón. El autor de Donna Lee es efectivamente Miles Davis. Lo que ocurrió fue que cuando se publicó la grabación, la discográfica cometió un error y le atribuyó indebidamente la autoría a Charlie Parker. Y por eso la mayoría pensamos que el autor es Charlie Parker, pero no. Así que Max tenía razón, la respuesta se la damos como válida y le damos un punto por esa pregunta y uno extra para compensar los daños causados. The third one. About harmony. What are the 5 notes that make up the C sharp major pentatonic scale?
C sharp major. C sharp, D sharp, E sharp, G sharp, A sharp.
Very good, very good, very good, very good. I'm gonna write it down. 1 good, 2 bad. It's okay, it's okay.
We'll get there, we'll get there. I got 3 more to turn it around.
All right. It's really difficult to find solos of double bass in classical music, but I found one and I want you to listen it. So give me a second.
This is a Mahler, right? I was just listening to this the other day.
Very good, very good. The question was the author and the name on the track, and you said it already. So very good, very good, very good, very good. Another right answer. Very good, Max. You can relax.
All right, we're even. We're at 500. We're at 500. We're good.
You can breathe. All right. Let's see the next one. George Gershwin, all right, was a very successful composer. He was worried about his poor technical knowledge, so he tried to continue improving his training. That's why he tried to be a student of a famous composer. And when Gershwin asked this composer, so famous, to train him, the teacher asked Gershwin, "How much money did you earn last year?" And Gershwin replied, $200,000. So the composer said, "Then I'm the one who should take classes with you." The question, can you tell me who was this famous teacher and composer who rejected Gershwin?
I know this story. And I wrote a thesis on Gershwin in college.
Oh,
I'm not gonna remember this. Yeah, I'm not gonna remember who it is. But I know this story though. It's a good story.
okay. I'll tell you. Try one number. You can try it.
What is a famous? Give me a hint. A jazz pianist or a classical?
Classical.
Oh, in that case, I'm definitely not gonna get it. It wasn't Arthur Rubinstein, was it?
Me ahogo, que se me ha ido el agua por el otro lado y casi me ahogo. He's from Russia. That's a clue.
Oh, well, does that actually help me? And it was a pianist, Russian pianist.
I don't give you any other clue.
Okay. Ben, I want to say Stravinsky, but that can't be right. Really?
Very good, very good. All
Hey,
right.
give me half credit for that. I don't deserve a full. I don't deserve full credit for that.
No, 1 whole point. So you have 3 good, 2 a little bit bad, but it's okay because we are at the last one. And with this question, you can win 4 points. Ooh. So you can relax and be careful because you can win the opportunity to come back for another interview.
All right, let's do it.
It's a very important question. And this is very difficult, at least for me, because I have to say a very weird name and it's difficult to say in Spanish. So in English, it's like, let's see you understand what I say.
Okay.
Let's see. Pithecanthropus erectus. That's a good word, eh? Pithecanthropus erectus.
Could you say it one more time, please?
Pithecanthropus erectus is a human fossil discovered in 1891. It is estimated to be between 700,000 and 2 million years old. And Pithecanthropus erectus is also the name of a famous composition, a music composition. So the question is, who is the author of the composition Pithecanthropus?
Oh, I got no chance. I have no chance. I have no idea where to start on this one. You mark me down as bad on this.
All right, I'll tell you. Charlie Mingus.
Oh, I should have had that. Yep.
How would you say in English Pithecanthropus erectus?
Good question.
You passed the quiz. You passed the quiz. And you can come back for another interview. Aunque ha fallado la pregunta y no haya ganado la posibilidad de volver a hacer otra entrevista, le vamos a conceder la oportunidad para compensar la metedura de pata que han tenido los guionistas en la pregunta de Donali. Max, I have the very last question.
Okay.
You want the opportunity to come back, but do you want to?
Yeah, absolutely. Let's do it.
Okay, great. I want you to come back. So I want to ask you something about Pithecanthropus.
Yeah, I'll be ready for that one. I'll be ready for the next time.
All right. All right. Then we have a second part. And now, Max, thank you so much for your time. I know you are very busy. You are from gig to gig and you are recording a lot of stuff. And I know you have not very much time. So thank you for being here. Thank you for this time, for your kindness. And really, it's great to have the chance to talk with you. And I really hope you come back. I'll write you. And I hope we keep in touch and we see you soon again.
Well, thank you very much. I enjoyed this a lot and I look forward to the next time.
All right. So bye. Bueno, ¿qué te ha parecido la entrevista? Estoy convencida de que la próxima vez que escuches música vas a buscar el bajo, ¿a que sí? Bueno, del examen ha salido un poco herido, pero los desafíos musicales los ha pasado con indudable solvencia. Ahora, ya sabes lo que te voy a pedir. dale like, comenta, comparte con quien quieras y así nos ayudas a llegar a más gente. Y te espero aquí en el próximo vídeo de Músicos en Canal.